So let's continue on to chapter 16, discussing negotiations and looking into that aspect of negotiations to determine if personality plays a role in negotiations. So in chapter 15, we talk about individual differences in personality abilities. And this is coming from the book, the text from McGraw-Hill on negotiations. And so what we're going to do in this particular segment is dive deeper into those individual differences being part of negotiations. So personality and negotiations. All right. Personality traits are stable tendencies to think, feel, or behave in certain ways identifiable and measurable. Personality traits can usually predict other aspects of our behavior, used interchangeably here with disposition. There is controversy in the fields of psychology and organizational behavior over the importance of dispositions. One side argues the dispositional effects are less important than situations in predicting attitudes and behaviors. The other side concedes situations matter, but insists dispositions are significant predictors of relevant behaviors. Well, in short, dispositions and situations both matter. We now look at the 9 predictors of negotiation behaviors. All right. And those 9, we look at, one is conflict style. So dealing with conflict is essential to the negotiation process. The 5 modes of dealing with conflict include contending, problem solving, interaction, yielding, and compromising. Underlying this was the degree of concern for their own outcomes and the degree of concern for the outcomes of other parties. There are 2 personality dimensions that can represent these degrees of concern. The degree of assertiveness and the degree of cooperativeness. Bringing these 2 dimensions together leads to 5 major conflict management styles: compete, accommodate, yield, collaborate, and compromise. Conflict style tendencies might lead to particular behaviors in certain situations. So let's look at this. The figure above on the monitor shows Thomas Kuhlman's conflict status. There's highly assertive and not assertive. Highly assertive people compete. Yield is at the low end. Accommodating is at the low end. They collaborate, but it's over here under high cooperation. And compromise is in the middle. So social value orientation, that's the second one. This is preferences people have regarding the outcomes they prefer in social settings where interdependence is required. Some have a pro-self or egotistic orientation. They're concerned with their own outcomes and uncertain about the other party's outcomes. Others have a pro-social or cooperative orientation. And this is a preference for outcomes that benefit both self and others who share interdependence. Now, pro-socials achieve integrative outcomes and are more satisfied with negotiation outcomes than are pro-self individuals. Differences in social value orientation behaviors can be diluted by aspects of the bargaining situation. With good alternatives and mutually available, the differences between pro-social and pro-self dissipate. Interpersonal trust. Third one. Interpersonal trust is the expectancy by an individual that the word, promise, or statement of another can be relied upon. This is determined by the experiences people have with others. A dispositional tendency to trust is significant in negotiations. High trusters impose high ethical and moral standards on themselves. Low trusters may feel less pressure to tell the truth. There is a self-fulfilling prophecy to dispositional trust. Yes. When approaching someone with trust or mistrust, they may reciprocate. Be aware of low trusters using trust as a ploy. Keep in mind, the effects of trust vary by culture. So self-efficacy and locus of control. Self-efficacy is a judgment about your ability to behave effectively in a situation. It is important, guys, in complex behavior like negotiations. Self-efficacy predicts choosing to negotiate rather than using mediation. Those believing themselves skilled employ strategies and achieve higher outcomes. Now, what about locus of control? So locus of control is the extent a person perceives they control events that occur. Those attributing events to luck have an external locus of control. If attributing events to ability, they have an internal locus of control. Internals appear good at value creation and value claiming. Self-efficacy, guys, and locus of control are labeled control perceptions. Now, let's move on to self-monitoring. Self-monitoring refers to the extent to which people are aware of and responsive to social cues. High self-monitors are attentive to social settings and inclined to treat this information as cues to how they should behave. Low self-promoters or monitors are less attentive and guided more in their own behavior choices by inner and personal feelings. So which are you? High self-monitor or you a low self-monitor? Now, empirical findings indicate that self-monitoring is an important individual difference influencing negotiations. Having the motivation to monitor the social context, read it accurately, and adjust it can be an asset in negotiations. Machiavellism. Now, high marks or max tend to be cynical, unsympathetic, and less willing to change their convictions under social pressure. They may tolerate behavior, violating social norms, and use deceptions. Results of studies of Machiavellian orientation shows high max or mocks and low max mocks both use lying, but once accused, high mocks maintain their ability to lie with greater credibility. High max attempt more manipulative behaviors than low max. There are four conceptual elements of Machiavellism. They are distrust, amoral manipulation, desires for control, and status. These are people, people with high Machiavellianism are people we perceive as very disloyal people. They have a leadership style that is dangerous at most, because that Machiavellism that's in them is innate, and they have just been structured around that. So high max use a variety of tactics to pursue their objectives, and may intimidate the other party to adjust their own strategy. And we can see this a lot in dark leadership behaviors. Machiavellism is a dark leadership behavior that, because they're going to use that more over all the other leadership styles they may have. Face threat sensitivity. So face refers to the value people place on their reputation. Now, some of us react negatively to threats of face. A study explored how FTS, or face threat sensitivity, might work as an element of the personality of the negotiators. Face is important as threats are make a negotiator competitive in a situation that might otherwise benefit from a cooperative behavior. Negotiating dyads with at least one high FTS negotiator were less likely to create value and less likely to reach cooperative settlements. Now, this is something. So that means that we need at least one high face threat sensitivity in the room with us when we're talking about negotiation, or that particular area of us needs to be responded, may have to be highlighted a little bit more. Epistemic motivation. Epistemic motivation describes an individual's desire to develop and hold an understanding of the world. When epistemic motivation is high, people analyze situations, they weigh arguments and solve problems without effortful thinking. In contrast, when low in epistemic motivation, people are more likely to form quick impressions and make snap judgments. It can be induced in people. It is important, therefore, in negotiations, as the situation is complex and the people don't always have all the information they need, that we are careful. You can't do this. So searching for and thinking about new information should yield better outcomes, especially in integrative negotiations. So how does the big five personality factors play into this? Well, the big five factor model of personality includes extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, emotional stability, and openness. In distributive bargaining, those higher in extroversion and agreeableness did worse due to being prone to anchoring. One study looked at the fit between negotiator and task. A new angle looks at the traits of both negotiators combined. So abilities in negotiations. Don't forget the big five now. Going back to the big five for a moment, these are things a lot of times companies are basing the fit of the person as to whether they can make it to the next level. And so the big five is used a lot to test individuals for higher ranking and higher level positions. Abilities in negotiations. So this section examines the relationship between four kinds of abilities and negotiations behavior. So there's cognitive ability. The traditional conceptualization of intelligence is cognitive. The more recently developed concept of emotional intelligence, perspective, meaning taking ability, and the ability to be effective cross-culturally. These are four areas of relationship between negotiations. So what about cognitive ability? Number one, this refers to a general mental capability involving the ability to reason, plan, solve problems, think abstractly, comprehend complex ideas, and learn quickly and learn from experience. These aspects of thinking and mental processing are clearly related to much of what goes on in the cognitive side of the negotiations. Studies find a strong link between cognitive ability and the degree of integrativeness of settlements reached. But what about purely distributive negotiations? Well, one study found no link between intelligence and performance. Emotional intelligence. EI, or emotional intelligence, encompasses a set of related abilities. It's the ability to perceive and express emotions accurately, the ability to assess emotion in facilitating thought, the ability to comprehend and analyze emotion, the ability to regulate your own emotions and those of others. Evidence shows EI can predict a job performance and may be an important individual difference for the study of negotiations. Negotiators with high emotional intelligence may use emotions to influence the outcome, this is referred to as emotional tuning. So those people who are highly aware of themselves, a lot of times are using this emotional intelligence to do this. Now, perspective taking ability. So taking one person's perspective enables negotiators to prepare and respond to the other's arguments. Negotiators' high and perspective taking ability are able to increase the concessions the other party is willing to make. They excel in competitive situations, less susceptible to anchoring. Now, the ability is especially important during integrative negotiations. Please be aware of reactive egoism, where the perspective taker considers how others would act selfishly, leading them to act selfishly in return. So you got to be aware of that. So cultural ability. So what are we talking about here when we talk about cultural ability? Context is important in negotiations, as we know, as it may determine whether a trait or an ability has any effect. Agreeableness and extroversion affect American negotiators, but do not affect Chinese negotiators, who are in turn affected by harmony. Now, researchers know people differ in their ability to adapt to culturally diverse situations. Cultural intelligence captures cognitive, motivational, and behavioral tendencies that play out in intercultural interactions. Cognitive aspects refer to how a person acquires and uses knowledge of cross-cultural differences and similarities. The motivational aspect is a person's energy directed at adaptation. Behavioral aspects are verbal and nonverbal skills when communicating across cultures. So studying experienced negotiators, we find that answers to the questions of, are good negotiators born or made? Just like leaders, are they born or are they made? Those who believe negotiation is a skill outperform those who believe negotiating abilities are fixed by a wide margin. There are three approaches that are used to study successful negotiators: expert versus amateur negotiators. Experts were more integrative and had higher outcomes than amateurs. Experienced versus naive negotiators. Experience allowed negotiators to better judge the other's priorities. And high-profile negotiators, a study of first-hand account interviews identifies a master negotiator. So, are they born or are they made? Now, most negotiation skills cover more than what one would cover in just one negotiation class in college. And it would cover a wide variety of negotiation classes, tactics, as well as the ability to debate. Now, as we conclude here, there is a value in understanding how personal differences are connected with negotiation processes and outcomes. Personal differences may be underrepresented in research. Individual differences matter for the following reasons, guys. Though negotiators can't choose their abilities, managers can choose a negotiator based on personal attributes. Differences may be a disadvantage, but can be compensated for with awareness or using a team with strengths where you are weak in that negotiation process. Understanding how differences affect negotiators improves your perceptions, interpretations, reactions, and actions to the other party's actions, as well as strategies. And that's it for chapter 15 on the art and science of negotiating when there are individual differences and how personalities and abilities interact and interfere with or come into play in the negotiation process.